Today, we are starting at the microscopic level, and we're zooming out from there.
All the way out.
We're looking at Chapter 83, Pregnancy and Lactation, from what looks like a standard, and I have to say, very dense medical physiology textbook.
Oh, it is dense. Believe me, this is one of those chapters that medical students absolutely dread because it's just pure mechanics. It's one process after another.
You can see that.
But if you actually stop and read it, line by line, it completely changes how you see the human body. It's not just a list of facts. It's an instruction manual.
I have to admit, when I first opened this file, my first thought was, okay, pregnancy, I get it. I know the basics.
The high-level summary.
Right. Egg meets sperm, 9 months later, there's a baby. But as I started reading through these diagrams and charts, I realized I didn't know anything. Not really.
It's way more complex than the storybook version.
It is. This chapter makes it clear this isn't just about having a baby. This is a manual on physiological engineering of the highest order. It's about how a human body radically transforms its own biology.
Its own rules.
Its heart, its lungs, its metabolism, even its bones. All to build another human from scratch. It's just staggering.
That is the perfect way to frame it. It is an engineering project. And, to be blunt, it's a hostile one in many ways.
Hostile.
Well, we tend to romanticize pregnancy, which is, fine socially. But biologically, it's a radical restructuring of what we can call the host environment to support a foreign object.
The fetus.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to get into those mechanics. We're going to look at the physics of gas exchange, the hormonal symphonies that basically prevent the body from rejecting the fetus, and even the sheer mechanical violence of birth.
We're going to decode the how and why of every single line in this chapter. So let's start where the text starts, not with the baby, but with the raw materials.
The journey to conception.
Yes. Specifically, let's start with the maturation of the egg. The text calls it the oocyte.
Right, the oocyte stage.
Now, I always had this mental image that the egg is just sort of sitting there in the ovary, fully formed, just waiting for its moment to shine.
Just waiting for the starting gun.
Exactly. But the text says there's a lot of prep work happening before it even leaves the starting gate. A critical final step.
There is. It's a process called meiosis. Before the oocyte is even released from the ovarian follicle, it has to divide its nucleus. But this is not a normal cell division.
How so?
Well, in a normal cell, it splits and you get two identical copies, perfect duplicates. But here, the egg is doing something very, very strategic. It takes its 46 chromosomes and it splits them, but it doesn't create two equal cells.
It creates one big cell and one tiny one, right? I saw that in the diagram.
Precisely. It kicks out half of its chromosomes into this small, you could call it a little biological trash bin called the first polar body.
Oh, boy.
And then it does it again to get itself down to just 23 unpaired chromosomes. It's essentially clearing the deck. It's throwing out its own genetic baggage so that when the sperm arrives with its 23 chromosomes, they can match up perfectly to make the full 46.
So it's optimizing itself for the merger. That makes sense. But here's the part that literally made me stop reading. I had to check another source because I just didn't believe it.
I think I know where you're going with this.
I always pictured the ovary and the fallopian tube as a connected system. Like a pipe that's welded to a tank. It seemed logical.
It does seem logical. A lot of people think that.
But they aren't connected. The text says the ovary and the fallopian tube are structurally separate. When ovulation happens, the egg isn't, shot neatly into the tube.
No.
It's expelled into the abdominal cavity, the peritoneal cavity. It's just floating there, and the empty space between your organs.
It is essentially free-floating in the body for a moment. Yeah.
That seems like a massive design flaw. I mean, if it's just floating in the abdomen, how does it not get lost? How does it find the tiny entrance to the tube?
That is where the incredible engineering comes in. The ends of the fallopian tubes aren't just open pipes. They have these finger-like projections called fimbriae.
Fimbriae.
And these fimbriae are lined with cilia, these microscopic hairs. Right around the time of ovulation, the woman's estrogen levels spike, and that's the signal. It tells these cilia to start beating furiously.
So they create a current in the fluid.
Exactly. It's a fluid vacuum. The fimbriae literally reach out and sweep across the surface of the ovary. They create this slow, steady suction that pulls the peritoneal fluid and the egg that's floating in it right into the opening of the tube.
It's like a biological Roomba, just vacuuming the area.
That's a great analogy, actually. And the text mentions a specific case study that proves just how powerful this little vacuum is.
Oh, yeah.
They've observed women who have, for various medical reasons, had one ovary removed remove, let's say, the left one, and the opposite fallopian tube removed, so the right one.
Okay, so mechanically, there's no direct path. The left ovary has no tube. The right tube has no ovary. It's a dead end.
You would think conception is physically impossible in that scenario, but these women can still get pregnant with surprising frequency.
How is that possible?
Well, the egg gets released from the left ovary, it enters the abdominal cavity, and it just floats all the way across the body, past the intestines, past the uterus, and gets sucked up by the fallopian tube on the other side, on the right side.
No way.
It's a phenomenon called transabdominal migration.
That is wild. So it's migrating clear across the body just on the strength of that tiny ciliary current.
That's the power of the design.
Okay, so the egg is now safely in the tube. Now we have to talk about the other player in this story, the sperm. And I have a bone to pick with the text here on the timeline.
The transport speed, I'm guessing?
Yes. The text states that sperm travel from the vagina to the ampulla, which is the fertilization site, way up in the tube in 5 to 10 minutes. Now, I did some back-of-the-napkin math here. A sperm is microscopic. It swims with a little tail, a flagellum. For a cell that tiny to travel that far, relatively speaking, in 5 minutes, the physics just doesn't work.
It doesn't add up.
It would be like a human swimming across the Atlantic Ocean in an hour. It's impossible.
You are absolutely right to question that. If the sperm were relying solely on their own motility, just swimming, it would take hours. Probably closer to an hour or two at the very best, and most of them would die of exhaustion long before they made it.
So the drag is too high.
The drag coefficient of the fluid in the uterus and the tubes is way too high for them to move that fast on their own steam.
So how are they doing it in 5 minutes? Is the text wrong?
No, the text is right about the time. The missing piece is that it's an active transport system. The sperm aren't just swimming, they're being shipped. Express delivery.
The female reproductive tract is doing the heavy lifting.
Aggressively. It's a combination of things. First, you have a contribution from the male side, chemicals called prostaglandins in the seminal fluid. These stimulate the uterus to contract.
Okay.
But there's a massive maternal factor, too. The text highlights that oxytocin, which is released during the female orgasm, causes the uterus and the fallopian tubes to contract rhythmically, in reverse.
It's a peristaltic pump, like in your esophagus?
Essentially, yes. It creates a suction effect. The uterus contracts in a way that actually aspirates the sperm from the vagina and just shoots them upward toward the fallopian tubes. They're basically surfing a wave of muscle contractions.
So the body is engineering the commute to be as short and efficient as possible. It's an express lane.
It has to be. The vaginal environment is acidic, the distance is enormous, speed is survival.
Okay, so the sperm arrives at the ampulla. It meets the egg. But the egg isn't just, open for business. It's wearing armor. The text describes the corona radiata and the zona pellucida.
Think of it like a fortress with multiple walls. The corona radiata is this layer of granulosa cells. It's like trying to get through a dense thicket of brush.
And the zona pellucida.
That's a tough glycoprotein shell underneath. It's the main barrier. The sperm has to breach both of them.
And it does this with enzymes. The text mentioned the acrosome.
Yes, the acrosome is the cap on the sperm's head. It's basically a little chemical warhead filled with proteolytic enzymes. When it hits the barrier, it releases these enzymes to literally dissolve a path through the shell. It's a form of chemical warfare.
And once one sperm gets through,
The door slams shut. Instantly, the membrane of the egg changes its electrical potential to prevent any other sperm from entering. It's called the block to polyspermy.
only one can win.
Only one. Then the genetic handshake happens. The sperm's head swells to become what's called a male pronucleus. The egg's nucleus becomes a female pronucleus. And those 23 unpaired chromosomes we talked about earlier, they finally find their partners.
And this is the exact moment sex is determined.
Right then and there. And it's entirely up to the sperm. The egg always contributes an X chromosome.
Okay.
The sperm can carry either an X or a Y. If an X-carrying sperm wins the race, you get XX a female. If a Y-carrying sperm wins, you get XY a male. The entire genetic blueprint for the new human is locked in before the cell even divides once.
So now we have a zygote, a fertilized egg. It's sitting there in the fallopian tube. And again, my intuition just looking at the anatomy was that gravity would just take over and it would sort of slide down into the uterus immediately.
Seems like it should.
But the text says there's a deliberate traffic jam.
A critical delay. The fertilized ovum stays in the fallopian tube for another 3 to 5 days. It is physically prevented from entering the uterus.
Why? Is the tube blocked or something?
It is blocked, and it's blocked on purpose. The text describes the isthmus, that's the last 2 centimeters of the tube right before it connects to the uterus, as being spastically contracted. The muscle is just clamped shut.
That seems so counterintuitive. Why would you want to trap the new embryo in the tube? Isn't that dangerous?
It would be if it stayed there, but the delay is essential. Because the oven isn't preheated yet. That's the best way to think about it.
The oven being the uterus.
Right. If the embryo arrives in the uterus too early, the uterine lining, the endometrium, it won't be ready to receive it. It won't have the nutrients prepared. The embryo would land in a barren environment and it would just die.
So the tube acts as a waiting room.
Exactly. While the embryo is stuck there in the tube, dividing from 2 cells to 4 to 8 and so on, the uterus is busy. It's producing what the text calls uterine milk.
Uterine milk, that sounds odd.
It's not actual milk, of course, but it's a very rich secretion. It's full of glycogen, proteins, lipids. It's preparing a nutrient bath for the embryo's arrival.
Okay, so the uterus is getting the nursery ready. What opens the gate then?
It's hormonal. Only when the mother's progesterone levels rise enough, which is usually around day 3 or 4 post-fertilization, does that spastic isthmus finally relax. The gate opens, and the blastocyst, which is now about 100 cells, can slide into the uterus.
The timing is just impeccable. It's like a holding pattern at an airport.
It is. Wait for the ground crew to be ready before you land the plane.
But once it lands, we enter the implantation phase. And I have to say, the language the text uses here it's aggressive. I literally wrote down the word invasion.
It is an invasion. That's the correct biological term for it. It's not a gentle attachment.
No, it describes the blastocyst floating for a day or two, feeding on that uterine milk, and then it attacks the wall. It says it digests the uterine wall.
We need to be really specific here because the cellular mechanism is just fascinating. The blastocyst has this outer layer of cells called trophoblasts.
Trophoblasts.
When these trophoblast cells touch the uterine wall, they begin to differentiate. They create this outer layer called the syncytiotrophoblast.
That is a mouthful. What does that look like?
Imagine a root system, but instead of individual roots, all the cells fuse together into this massive, multinucleated protoplasmic thicket. There are no cell walls between the nuclei. It's just one giant, aggressive biological mass, a blob.
And what does this blob do?
It secretes those proteolytic enzymes again, the same kind of enzymes designed to digest protein. It literally liquefies the endometrial cells of the mother's uterus.
So it's dissolving the mother's own tissue.
It dissolves the tissue, the uterine glands, and eventually the walls of the mother's own blood vessels. It is actively excavating a hole in the uterine wall and burying itself inside.
It eats its way into a home.
It does, and as it dissolves the mother's capillaries, her blood spills out into these little pockets called lacunae. The embryo essentially creates a small lake of the mother's blood and then floats its own absorption routes, the villi, into that lake to feed.
That is visceral. That's a much more intense picture than I had.
For the first 8 weeks or so, the embryo is surviving on what's called histiotropic nutrition. It's cannibalizing the nutrient-rich decidual cells of the uterine lining. It's basically eating the house to build a foundation for the new structure.
That completely disrupts the greeting card version of pregnancy. We always frame this as this nurturing, harmonious event.
It's a beautiful outcome, but the process is a battle.
Reading chapter 83, it reads more like a tactical containment strategy. The mother's body is trying to tolerate a parasite without letting it take over completely.
Containment is the perfect word. The placenta is essentially an organ that is programmed to say, I'm going to take everything I can get from you, and the mother's physiology has to evolve to say, okay, I will give you this much and no more.
And if that balance fails...
If that balance fails, you get very serious complications like preeclampsia, which we'll definitely talk about later.
But eventually the baby gets too big for just eating the lining, right? It needs a more permanent, more efficient life support system.
Right. That trophoblastic nutrition can only last so long.
Around week 12, the text says the placenta takes over completely.
The transition to what's called placental diffusion. And this is where the engineering really ramps up to a whole new level.
The placenta. The text calls this the ultimate life support system. And the anatomy here is crucial because I think a lot of people, and I'll include myself in this until today, think that the mother's blood flows into the baby.
That's a very common misconception.
You know, that her blood goes through the umbilical cord and circulates through the fetus, but that's not true at all, is it?
No, and that is the single most important concept to grasp about the placenta. The bloods never mix. It is a closed-loop system for the fetus and a separate open-loop system for the mother.
Can you visualize that for us? If the bloods don't mix, how does all the good stuff get across? The oxygen, the nutrients.
Okay, so imagine two trees with their root systems completely interlocked, but the roots themselves never actually break open or touch on the inside.
Okay.
The fetus sends its blood down the two umbilical arteries into these tiny finger-like projections called chorionic villi. These are the fetal roots. And these villi are dipped into that pool of maternal blood we talked about, the maternal sinus.
So the fetal blood is inside the finger, and the mother's blood is just washing over the outside of the finger.
Exactly. There is a membrane between them, a very, very thin one, the placental membrane. Everything, oxygen, glucose, waste products, everything has to diffuse across that membrane. It has to jump the gap.
And this brings us to what I think is the biggest engineering challenge in this whole chapter.
The oxygen problem.
Breathing underwater. The text gives us some really specific numbers here, and I want to dwell on them because they seem impossible when you first read them.
They do.
The partial pressure of oxygen, the PO2, in the mother's blood, in that placental sinus, is only about 50 millimeters of mercury.
Right, which is already low.
It's very low. In a normal adult, our arterial oxygen pressure is nearly 100 millimeters at Hg. So the mother is offering up blood that is essentially half as oxygenated as what you and I are breathing right now.
And it gets worse.
Because the fetus receives it at about 30 millimeter Hg.
30. By any adult standard, the fetus is profoundly hypoxic. If you or I had a PO2 of 30, we would be unconscious and dying. We would be suffocating.
So how does the fetus survive? Not just survive, but grow at such a rapid rate when it's basically choking for air the entire time?
It comes down to 3 brilliant physiological hacks. The text lays them out very clearly. The first one is all about the hardware.
The hardware?
The hardware it's using to carry oxygen. Hemoglobin F, fetal hemoglobin.
And how is that different from my hemoglobin, which would be hemoglobin A for adult?
Adult hemoglobin is great, but fetal hemoglobin is an oxygen magnet. It's chemically different. If you look at the oxygen dissociation curve in the text, I think it's figure 83-4, you can see the fetal curve is shifted to the left of the adult curve.
Okay, explain what shifted to the left means for someone who isn't a physiologist.
It means it has a much higher affinity for oxygen. At those very low oxygen pressures found in the placenta, where your adult hemoglobin would just shrug and drop the oxygen, fetal hemoglobin grabs it and holds on tight.
Stickier.
Much stickier. It can carry 20 to 50% more oxygen at those low levels than your blood ever could. It's a protein that is specifically designed to work in a low oxygen environment.
Okay, so that's hack number 1. It has sticky hemoglobin. What's the second hack?
The second one is just brute force concentration. The fetal blood has about 50% more hemoglobin concentration than the mother's blood.
So more red blood cells.
More red blood cells, more hemoglobin per cell. So even if the oxygen pressure is low, and even if the tank is only half full, so to speak, the fetus has twice as many trucks on the road to carry what little oxygen is there.
Strength in numbers. I get that. Now the third one, this one had a fancy name that I really want to unpack. The double Bohr effect.
Yes, this is, to me, the most elegant mechanism in the entire placenta. It's beautiful.
I know the Bohr effect in general has to do with pH, with acidity, right?
Correct. The standard Bohr effect describes how pH affects hemoglobin's ability to hold on to oxygen. And the rule is simple. Acidity makes hemoglobin release oxygen. Alkalinity makes hemoglobin hold on to oxygen more tightly.
Okay, so how is it double in the placenta?
Because it's happening in both directions at the same time, on opposite sides of that membrane, you have to imagine the chemical exchange happening at that exact microscopic border between the mother's blood and the fetal blood.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Right. So the fetal blood arrives at the placenta. It's been circulating through the baby, picking up waste products, so it's loaded with waste, specifically carbon dioxide, CO2.
And CO2, when it's in blood, makes carbonic acid, so it's acidic.
Exactly. The fetal blood arrives at the placenta acidic. Meanwhile, the mother's blood is arriving fresh from her lungs. It's low in CO2. So what happens with diffusion?
The CO2 moves from high concentration in the fetus to low concentration in the mother. The fetus dumps its trash.
Right. But look at what that does to the chemistry on both sides. As the fetal blood loses all that acidic CO2, it becomes less acidic. It becomes more alkaline.
And you just said that alkaline blood likes to hold on to oxygen.
Exactly. As soon as it dumps the CO2, the fetal hemoglobin suddenly becomes hungry for oxygen. Its capacity to bind oxygen goes up instantly.
And what's happening on the mother side of the membrane at the same time?
The exact opposite. She is picking up all that CO2 from the fetus. So her blood in the placenta becomes more acidic. And what does acid do to hemoglobin?
It forces it to release its oxygen.
It forces it to let go. So the mother's blood is chemically forced to dump its oxygen payload at the exact same moment that the fetal blood is chemically primed to grab it.
Wow. So it's a synchronized chemical transfer. It's not passive at all?
It's a perfectly synchronized exchange. The fetus losing its waste makes it better at grabbing fuel, and the mother gaining that waste makes her better at giving up the fuel. That is the double Bohr effect. Without it, the fetus probably couldn't get enough oxygen to survive.
That is incredibly cool. It's like they're high-fiving the oxygen molecule across the border.
It really is. And this same logic, this diffusion gradient, applies to everything. Take glucose, for instance. The fetus is a glucose hog.
It needs sugar to grow.
Desperately. It uses these special carrier molecules for facilitated diffusion to just rip glucose out of the mother's blood as fast as possible. The text even notes that the fetus will continue to draw glucose from the mother, even if the mother herself is starving.
It takes priority over the mother's own needs.
Absolute priority. The fetus is genetically programmed to control and win the gradient battle.
Which is a perfect segue to the hormonal control of all this.
Yeah.
Because none of this just happens. There's a chemical conductor for this entire symphony.
There is.
The text outlines 4 main hormones, and I want to go through them because they really explain why the mother's body changes so profoundly. The first one is HCG human chorionic gonadotropin.
The famous one. This is the signal flare. It's the hormone that all the home pregnancy tests are designed to look for, and it's secreted by those trophoblast cells we talked about right after implantation.
And what is its main job? What's the first thing it does?
Its most critical job is to prevent the mother from having her period. Normally, if an egg isn't fertilized, this little structure in the ovary called the corpus luteum dies off after about 12 days.
Okay.
When it dies, progesterone levels drop, and the uterine lining sheds. That's menstruation. For a new pregnancy, that would be catastrophic. It would just flush the embryo out. HCG's job is to scream at the corpus luteum, "Don't die, stay alive, keep pumping out progesterone."
So it's basically buying time until the placenta is developed enough to take over making its own progesterone.
Exactly. It's a temporary life support signal. But it also has another fascinating role that the text mentions, specifically involving male fetuses.
Oh, right, the testosterone link. I saw that.
Yes. Chemically, HCG is very similar to another hormone called luteinizing hormone, or LH. In the male fetus, HCG stimulates the interstitial cells in the fetal testes to start producing testosterone.
So the mother's pregnancy hormone is actually what triggers the male fetus to start developing male sex organs instead of female ones.
That's right. Without that HCG signal, a genetically male fetus might not develop the correct external anatomy. It's a critical step in male differentiation.
That is a detail I absolutely never knew.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's HCG. Hormone number 2, estrogen. I mean, I think of this as a baseline female hormone, but in pregnancy, the levels are just astronomical.
They are. And interestingly, the placenta can't make estrogen from scratch. It's a bit of a cheat. It has to take these weak androgen compounds from both the mother's and the fetus's adrenal glands and then convert them into powerful estrogens. But its function, estrogen is the builder.
What is it building?
Everything. It causes the massive enlargement of the uterus to accommodate the growing baby. It enlarges the breasts and grows the ductal structure needed for milk production, but it also changes the mother's skeleton.
The skeleton.
It relaxes the pelvic ligaments. Specifically, it makes the sacroiliac joints and the pubic symphysis more limber and flexible. The pelvis essentially has to become a dynamic, flexible structure to allow the baby's head to pass through during birth.
So that's why pregnant women often have that specific gait or waddle later on. Their pelvis is literally looser.
It is. Estrogen is remodeling the chassis of the car while it's driving down the road.
Okay, so estrogen builds and loosens. What about progesterone? The text calls it the maintainer.
And that's a perfect description. If estrogen is the builder, progesterone is the quiet superintendent who keeps everything from falling apart. Its most critical job is to keep the uterus quiet.
Quiet how?
The uterus is a giant muscle, and its natural tendency is to contract. Progesterone strongly inhibits those contractions throughout the pregnancy to prevent spontaneous abortion or early labor. It acts as a powerful sedative for the uterine muscle. It also helps develop the decidual cells for nutrition and prepares the breasts for lactation.
So it keeps a lid on things.
Mhm.
Now, the last one. This one was labeled the mystery hormone, human chorionic somatomamotropin, or HCS.
This one is fascinating because it is secreted in absolutely huge amounts, more than all the other pregnancy hormones combined. Yet for a long time, physiology texts basically just said, we're not really sure what this does.
And now we know.
Now we have a much better idea. We know it acts very much like a growth hormone for the fetus, but its most aggressive and important function is a metabolic one. HCS causes profound insulin resistance in the mother.
Wait, insulin resistance, that sounds like what happens in type 2 diabetes.
It's essentially the same mechanism. It mimics a diabetic state, and if it goes too far, it's diagnosed as gestational diabetes. But the biological purpose behind it is very clever and very ruthless.
Go on.
So insulin helps your cells absorb sugar, right? By making the mother's cells resistant to her own insulin, HCS ensures the mother's and fat cells stop taking up as much glucose from her blood.
She stops burning the sugar.
She does. So where does that extra sugar go? It stays circulating in her blood, which means the concentration of glucose in her blood is higher, which means there's more glucose available to diffuse across the placenta to the hungry baby.
So HCS is a hijacker. It's a hormone that blocks the mother from eating her own lunch so the baby can have it first.
Precisely. It forces the mother's body to switch its primary fuel source. She starts burning fat for her own energy-releasing things called free fatty acids, while reserving the premium fuel, the glucose, for the fetus. It is a total metabolic takeover orchestrated by the placenta.
Honestly, that just sounds exhausting for the mother. You have your skeleton loosening, your period stopped, and now your metabolism is hijacked to run on fat.
It is exhausting. And that leads us directly into the section on maternal adaptations, because the mother's body is taking an absolute beating here. The text breaks down the average weight gain, and it's not just eating for two.
No, the breakdown was very specific.
Yeah.
The average gain is, 25 to 35 pounds?
Yeah.
But only about 8 pounds of that is actually the baby. So where is the rest of that weight coming from?
It's almost all fluid and infrastructure. You've got about 4 pounds of amniotic fluid in the placenta itself. The uterus and breasts grow by about 5 pounds, but then you have a massive increase in fluid retention and, most importantly, blood. The mother's blood volume increases by 30 to 40%.
A third more blood in her body. That's a huge amount of extra liquid to carry around and pump.
It is. The text mentions that this can lead to what they call a circulatory shock potential after birth if there's a hemorrhage. But just think about the heart during the pregnancy. The cardiac output, the amount of blood the heart pumps per minute, has to increase by 30 to 40% just to move all that extra blood around.
So the heart is working significantly harder, even when the mother is just sitting on the couch.
Constantly. And it's not just the circulatory system. Because of the progesterone we mentioned earlier, the respiratory system changes dramatically too. I found this part really interesting because I've heard pregnant women complain about feeling short of breath.
Yeah, you assume it's just the baby pushing up on the lungs.
That happens later, but this is different. It's chemical. Progesterone makes the respiratory center in the brainstem hypersensitive to CO2.
So the brain's CO2 detector is set to be way more sensitive.
Right. So the brain thinks there's too much CO2 in the blood, even when there isn't. And it signals the lungs to breathe more, to breathe faster and deeper. The mother starts to hyperventilate slightly. Her minute ventilation, the amount of air she moves, goes up by 50%.
50%. And why? Is this for the diffusion gradient again?
That's exactly it. It's all for the gradient. If the mother's CO2 levels in her blood were normal, the gradient between her and the fetus would be too small. The fetus wouldn't be able to dump its CO2 waste as easily. She has to keep her own CO2 tank artificially empty so the fetus can fill it.
It's amazing how interconnected all these systems are. The kidneys are doing the same thing, right? Working overtime.
The kidneys have to clean 2 bodies worth of waste. The glomerular filtration rate, which is the measure of how much blood the kidneys are filtering, increases by 50%. They're constantly filtering waste from the mother and all waste products coming from the fetus. The entire renal system is in overdrive for 9 months straight.
Now, with all these systems, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys, the metabolism, all running at 150% of their normal capacity, things can go wrong. The text dedicates a very serious section to preeclampsia.
This is the danger zone. It affects about 5% of all pregnancies, so it's not rare.
And the text describes it as, at its core, a failure of adaptation.
That's the best way to view it. In a normal, healthy pregnancy, the mother's blood vessels are supposed to widen, they dilate, to handle that extra 30–40% of blood volume. The total peripheral resistance goes down. But in preeclampsia, that adaptation fails. The arteries, especially the ones feeding the placenta, spasm. They constrict when they should be relaxing.
And that causes dangerously high blood pressure.
Extreme hypertension. And because the kidneys are being hammered by this incredible pressure, their delicate filtration membranes start to break down. You start seeing protein spilling into the urine. That's a classic sign that the entire vascular system is failing to contain the stress of the pregnancy.
What causes it? Do we know?
We still aren't 100% sure, but the text mentions a few leading theories. One is that it's an autoimmune reaction. The mother's immune system is, in a way, rejecting the placenta. Another is that the placenta itself isn't getting enough blood, so it releases toxic substances to try and force the mother's vessels to deliver more blood, which backfires and causes the spasms.
It's a life-threatening condition for both mother and child.
Absolutely, because those spasms can cut off blood flow to the placenta entirely.
It really highlights that hostile engineering concept we started with. This is a high-stakes biological negotiation. But assuming we navigate the hormonal shifts, the metabolic hijack, and the vascular stress, we eventually reach the end of the line.
Parturition, birth.
The grand finale. And the big question is, what starts it? Is there a timer that goes off? Does the baby press a button that says eject?
It's not a single switch like that. It's more of a tipping point. Throughout the pregnancy, remember we said progesterone is the calming influence that keeps the uterus quiet?
Right. And estrogen is the exciting influence?
Exactly. Well, toward the end of pregnancy, starting around the 7th month, that ratio begins to shift. Estrogen production continues to rise and rise, but progesterone levels tend to plateau or their receptors become less sensitive. Estrogen starts to overtake progesterone in its influence.
So the brakes are coming off, and the gas pedal is getting pressed harder.
That's a perfect analogy. The uterus becomes more irritable. It starts contracting weakly. Those are the Braxton Hicks contractions. At the same time, the number of oxytocin receptors on the uterine muscle increases dramatically. The muscle becomes primed and ready for the go signal.
And the fetus plays a role in sending that signal.
It does. It's a two-way street. The fetus's adrenal glands start releasing cortisol, its pituitary releases oxytocin, and the fetal membranes release prostaglandins. It's basically sending a cascade of chemical messages saying, I'm huge, I'm stressed in here, and I'm ready to get out.
And this all leads to one of the most classic examples of a positive feedback loop in all of biology. The text outlines the mechanical theory of labor. This isn't just pain, it's pure physics.
Walk us through that loop. It's so critical.
Okay, step 1. The baby's head drops down into the pelvis and begins to physically stretch the cervix.
Right. The cervix is the muscular opening at the bottom of the uterus.
Step 2. That physical stretch triggers nerves that send a signal all the way up to the main body of the uterus, the fundus.
Step 3. The uterine body responds to that signal by contracting powerfully.
Step 4. That contraction pushes the baby's head down even harder into the cervix.
Which leads to step 5. The cervix stretches more.
Which causes a stronger nerve signal. Which causes a stronger uterine contraction. Which pushes the baby's head harder.
Yeah.
Which stretches the cervix even more.
It is a self-amplifying cycle. A runaway train. Most feedback loops in the body are negative. They're designed to stabilize things, bring you back to normal. This one is designed to explode. Once it hits a critical threshold, it becomes unstoppable until the source of the baby is expelled. It generates immense force.
The text also mentioned the role of the abdominal muscles here. It's not just the uterus doing the work, right?
No, not at all. The uterus provides the powerful rhythmic contractions, but the mother's conscious bearing down using her abdominal muscles like she's having a bowel movement adds a huge amount of hydraulic pressure to the system. It can double the expulsive force.
And then, the stages. First, the cervix has to dilate. Then the fetus is delivered. But we aren't done yet, which is something I think people forget.
The third stage, delivery of the placenta. This is often overlooked, but physiologically, it's an incredibly violent and dangerous moment.
Why is that?
Because as soon as the baby is out, the uterus begins to shrink rapidly. The surface area of the uterine wall gets much smaller very quickly, but the placenta is an organ. It can't shrink. So the uterine wall shrinking underneath it causes the placenta to buckle and shear off the wall.
That sounds like it would cause a massive hemorrhage. You are tearing a blood-filled organ off a blood-soaked wall.
It does create a massive wound. The uterine arteries and veins that were feeding the placenta are torn wide open. The average blood loss is about 350 milliliters. But here's the brilliant safety mechanism. As the uterus contracts, The muscle fibers crisscross in a way that they act like living ligatures.
Living
They
ligatures.
squeeze those open blood vessels completely shut. The uterine muscle itself acts as an internal tourniquet to stop the hemorrhage. If that contraction fails, it's a major medical emergency.
And then the healing process, involution, takes weeks.
About 4 weeks for the uterus to shrink from the size of a watermelon all the way back down to the size of a pear. And during that time, there's a discharge called lochia, which is essentially the biological debris from the healing placental wound site.
So the baby is out, the placenta is gone, the uterus is clamping down. But the biological engineering project still isn't over. We have one more massive system to discuss: lactation.
The follow-through, the final act.
The text makes a clear distinction between building the pipes and building the factories in the breast.
Right. And this development has been happening in the background the whole time. Estrogen has been developing the ductal system. Those are the pipes that will carry the milk. And progesterone has been developing the lobule alveolar system, the little clusters of cells that are the actual milk factories.
But there's a paradox here, which I found fascinating. The text says that while these two hormones build the entire system, they also block it from working.
Yes. This is a crucial control mechanism. The very high levels of estrogen and progesterone during pregnancy actually inhibit the actual secretion of milk. They build the factory, but they put a big lock on the on switch. They prevent the milk from flowing while the baby is still inside.
So what flips the switch? What turns the factory on?
The birth itself,
Okay.
specifically the delivery of the placenta. The placenta was the source of all that estrogen and progesterone. When it leaves the body, the levels of those two hormones crash precipitously.
So the inhibition is suddenly removed.
The lock is gone. And suddenly, prolactin, a hormone secreted by the mother's own pituitary gland, is free to work. Its inhibitory chains are broken, and it rushes in and tells the alveolar cells to start producing milk.
And initially, it's not full milk, right? The text calls it colostrum.
For the first 1 to 7 days, yes. Colostrum is often called liquid gold, and for good reason. It's low in volume, but it is packed with proteins and, most crucially, antibodies from the mother. It's the baby's first immunization, delivered straight to its gut.
Now here's where the engineering gets really responsive and interactive. The text describes a surge in prolactin every single time the bounty eats.
It's a perfect demand and supply system. The physical act of the baby suckling sends nerve signals from the nipple to the mother's hypothalamus in her brain. This triggers a massive 10 to 20-fold surge in prolactin secretion that lasts for about an hour.
So the baby is literally placing an order for its next meal.
Exactly. That surge of prolactin is what creates the milk for the next feeding. If the baby stops nursing, the signal stops, prolactin levels drop, and the milk supply dries up. If the baby nurses more frequently, more milk is made. It's a direct feedback loop.
But making the milk is only half the battle.
Right.
You have to get it out of the factory and down the pipes. This is the letdown reflex.
And this involves our old friend oxytocin again. We saw it in sperm transport. We thought causing contractions in labor. And here it is again in breastfeeding. It's a very versatile hormone.
So how does it work here?
The milk is secreted into the alveoli, those little sacs, but it can't flow out on its own. It needs to be squeezed out. There are these special cells called myoepithelial cells that are wrapped around the alveoli like a little net.
Are they muscle cells?
They are. They're smooth muscle cells. When oxytocin is released, which is also triggered by the baby suckling, these little cells contract and they literally squeeze the milk out of the alveoli and into the ducts. It pushes the milk down toward the nipple.
And the text mentioned a psychological component here too, which is just amazing.
Yes. Because oxytocin release is controlled by the hypothalamus and posterior pituitary, it's very strongly linked to emotion and thought. A nursing mother hearing a baby cry, even if it's not her own baby on TV, can trigger an oxytocin release, causing her milk to let down involuntarily.
Wow.
And conversely, stress, fear, or anxiety can inhibit oxytocin release, blocking the milk flow even if the breast is completely full of milk.
That is fascinating. The brain is directly controlling the valve on the milk supply. Now we have to talk about the cost, because I think we seriously underestimate how metabolically expensive breastfeeding is for the body.
It is incredibly expensive. The text makes a direct comparison to the pregnancy itself. Producing 1.5 liters of milk a day drains more calories, more energy from the mother than the 9 months of gestation did.
And the calcium drain. This part actually worried me when I read it.
It should. Milk requires a huge amount of calcium to make. If the mother's diet doesn't provide enough of it, the parathyroid glands in her neck will actually enlarge. They will hypertrophy.
We know the parathyroid gland regulates calcium in the blood, usually to keep our heart beating and our nerves firing properly. But here, the text describes a hypertrophy. That sounds like a pathological state induced by the baby's needs.
It is essentially a temporary state of hyperparathyroidism. If you or I had these hormone levels without a baby attached, a doctor would be scanning us for tumors.
And what does this overactive gland do?
It triggers cells called osteoclasts to dissolve the mother's own bone matrix. It actively strips calcium from the mother's bones to put it into the milk for the baby's bones.
The body prioritizes the baby's bone structure over the mother's own structural integrity.
It's a non-negotiable biological directive. The mother's homeostasis is sacrificed for the infant's growth. The text says the bones will decalcify significantly during a long period of lactation, though they usually recover their density after weaning.
Again, it's the baby-first policy of physiology at all costs.
And immunity, too. It's not just colostrum. The mature milk contains antibodies and even living neutrophils that actively destroy bacteria like E. coli in the infant's gut. The mother is essentially exporting her own immune system to protect the baby while its own system slowly comes online.
So when we look back at this whole trajectory, from that single cell loading in the abdomen to the aggressive invasion of the uterus, the hijacking of the blood supply, the metabolic shifts, the violent feedback loop of labor, and finally the energy and calcium drain of lactation.
It is a relentless, perfectly coordinated series of biological events. It's breathtaking.
It really puts the phrase miracle of life into a very specific mechanical perspective. It's less of a magic trick and more of a masterclass in physiological engineering under extreme pressure.
Absolutely. The way the body manipulates partial pressures of oxygen or uses hormonal surges to completely reshape anatomy. It's the most sophisticated biological machine we know of.
And that leads us to a final thought for you to take away from this.
We've been talking about cooperation, but there's also a very real tension here. We saw the blastocyst invade the uterine wall like a parasite. We saw the fetus steal glucose and leave the mother to burn fat. We saw the calcium stripped from the mother's own bones to build the babies.
It raises a pretty provocative question, I think. Is pregnancy truly a cooperative partnership? Or is it a biological negotiation where the fetus is genetically programmed at every single step to win at all costs?
It's a tension that biology has balanced on a knife edge for millions of years. And thankfully, most of the time, both parties managed to survive the negotiation.
A huge thank you to everyone for listening to this deep dive into Chapter 83. We hope you'll never look at a baby bump or a physiology textbook in quite the same way again.
Thanks for listening.
See you in the next deep dive.